I will introduce you, but I will say that.
Okay. Do tell them.
I feel like that.
Welcome to Rotary, and so let's get started. My name is Clay Harrell, and I've only been a member for a couple of years, and maybe some of you don't know much, but I'll give you a brief introduction again. I happen and was fortunate enough to grow up in a small farming community in the eastern part of the state called Saratoga. Saratoga is in Wilson County. It has a population of 450 at that time, and the population is probably 452 today. It's like Mayberry on a dime. There's one stoplight, one filling station, one grocery store. Of course, there's a beauty parlor and a barber shop. And the school is one building right in the center of town, and the school houses all 12 grades. The average in per grade was about 20 students per grade. Somehow I made it through that, but life was quiet. It was very pleasant to grow up in. Then I moved came to UNC, graduated from there, and was fortunate enough following that to attend the medical school here, and then after that another 4 years with the OBGYN division in the medical school. My wife and I at that point chose to go to Charlotte to live. Which was probably the second best decision I've made. Charlotte was a wonderful city to live in. The medical community could not have been better. It was a city on the move, but it always seemed to have a goal in mind, so a lot of the growth you didn't seem to interfere with normal life. Upon retirement, we decided to move back to Chapel Hill, which was a relatively easy move because of our time here. And in addition, we have a daughter and her family who live here with 2 grandchildren here. So the transition, despite leaving a lifetime of friends, patients, associates, and so forth in Charlotte, turned out to be relatively easy and has been smooth, and we've enjoyed our time back in Chapel Hill. So, with that, I'm going to do the blessing today, so let's bow our heads and I'll give thanks. May those assembled here today enjoy the many offerings of Rotary. May we abide by the rules that we have established, those of trust, fellowship, and ethics. May we place service above self in all our endeavors. May we always test ourselves and our efforts to be sure that they are the truth, good for all concerned, and a benefit to mankind, and provide peace and understanding. Amen. Amen. Are there any visitors here today that need introduction?
Hi, my guest today is Leslie Brock, who is the Vice President of Property Management or something like that with Hilltop Properties here in Chapel Hill, where she has been for, I think, over 25 years. So, Leslie.
Any others?
Yeah. Aaron Shaw is back, I think, for the 3rd, maybe 4th time, so welcome, Aaron.
And any, yes?
Yeah, we've got this visiting Rotary.
Oh.
Oh.
Hi.
visiting.
Good afternoon. My name is Barb Wilkinson. I'm visiting today from Truckee, California, North Lake Tahoe. A little bit too much snow for me out there right now, so I decided to come get spring because we won't have spring if we have it at all until about July. So very happy to be here. Thank you.
I'll start the sign bucket basket. Now, since I have spent a lifetime assisting with the needs of women with their health and other issues, I'm not going to make women reflect the little jokes I tell today. So, however, I've turned the table, and men, be prepared. You may smile, you may identify, and you might even laugh. A little story. So one day, a housework challenged husband decided to wash his sweatshirt. Seconds after he went to the laundry, he shouted back to his wife, "What setting do I use on the washing machine?" "It depends," she replied. "What does it say on your shirt?" And his response was, "Ohio State." A couple is lying in bed. The husband turns over to his wife and says, "I'm going to make you the happiest person in the world." Her response is, "And I'll miss you too." And then Jack's getting out of the shower one morning, and he says to his wife, "It is so hot today, it's too hot to even wear clothes. What do you think the neighbors would think if I went out and mowed the grass like this?" And she responded, "Probably that I married you for your money." And then there's the woman's or the wife's prayer, similar to the Alcoholics Anonymous. And it says, "Dear Lord, I pray for wisdom to understand my man, to love and forgive him, and patience for his mood. Because, Lord, if I pray for strength, I'll beat him to death." And then two women are having a conversation at lunch, and one says to the other, "How do you keep your husband from reading the emails?" And her response is, "Rename the email folder to instruction manuals." So maybe a little redemption from your men with this one last full story. A young man recently was sending emails to a few of his male friends, and he announced in the email that I had a business associate give me two tickets to the Masters, which included tickets to the finest venues there. And then he says, but little did he know that the Masters was the same weekend as my wedding. So he says, if you're interested, I'm looking for someone to take my place. Is it St. Michael's Church in the Wayne? 3 p.m. The bride's name is Nicole. She's 5'4" and about 115 pounds and attractive, and she's a good cook. She'll be the one in the white dress. With that, I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Beautiful Friday in Carolina. My name is Pat Phelan. I used to be your president, but you voted me out. So I'm substituting for Omar, who's on international travel right now. Just a couple of announcements before we get to our speaker. Apparently, someone had read to where Marvin Carver's wife had passed away this past week. So I'm sure Marvin would love it if you reached out to him with some condolences. People who know Marvin would love, I'm sure he'd love to visit, but if you would just keep him in your thoughts and prayers and check in on him if you're so inclined. Secondly, in 2 weeks, we're going to have a computer drive. In 2 weeks, if you bring your old laptops or monitors here, they will be cleaned of all information, and then we're going to donate them, and I forgot to look up where they were going. Cramden. But aren't they going to another country?
No, that's different.
That's different. You just forget about that. Sometimes things just come in my head, and it's not even pertinent.
They might end up in it.
They might end up. They might. I mean, it could happen, but it's just not this time. So Cramden. So 2 weeks. Bring them here. Laptops, monitors, and phones even, and then iPads or whatever they call it, whatever it is. So that's 2 weeks from today. Tablets. Thank you. Does anybody else have any announcements or any? Lorenzo.
Yeah, just an announcement to alert everyone. So RILA is taking place this weekend. Our club has 3 kids who are attending, and it has to be a big shout out for Chris Elmore. You know, he's a devoted member, but his job keeps him from attending. He did the whole program, and also a big thank you to Mary Rukowski, who's taking the kids up and picking them up on Sunday.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lorenzo. RILA is near and dear to my heart. My kids all went through there. The third one got sick that weekend, but they loved it and they remember it to this day. Anybody else? Yes.
Hey, I've been helping my new family get settled, and they are referred to a couple of lamps in the microwave. So when you're checking out your old computers, if you should turn up that you have them, just let me know.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll catch up with you.
Yeah. So if you have anything that an immigrant family could use, lamps and a microwave.
Couple of lamps in the microwave.
Couple lamps and a microwave. So keep that in mind, and we can go from there. With no further hesitation, I'll bring up Jennifer, and she can introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Okay, well, you have this really well-written bio in front of you, but I just want to have you pause for a moment and remember what life was like for you in the spring of 2020. If you can remember back that far, when the world shut down, and most of us, the only interaction we had with the outside world were the people in our homes. That was not the case for Michelle Fishburne, our speaker today. Michelle traveled the country throughout COVID to hear stories, and we have the benefit today of her sharing some of those tales from her travels, and also sharing a bit about her new book, Who We Are Now, What Americans Lost and Found During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Michelle?
It would be
Yes.
it helps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you all for having me here today. I am a UNC grad, graduated in 1984 with a degree in political science. Went off to UVA, got my law degree, practiced international law in Washington, D.C. for a decade. When my first child was born, moved to Chapel Hill, which is a lot like the town that I grew up in, which was Princeton, New Jersey, and raised my family here. And was here with my youngest, who was a senior in high school, in the spring of 2020, when everything got kind of different, right? So that picks up with the story. And while I was here in town, I did a lot of nonprofit work. In fact, I was saying to Jennifer, I remember speaking at a Habitat event when I was on the board years and years ago when my kids were very small. But anyway, so that's a little bit about me. So before I start, I'd like to ask everyone a question. And this is the question I asked hundreds of people as I traveled all over the United States. This is how we're going to start. This is the question. It's January 1st, 2020. What was your 2020 supposed to be like? And what did it end up being like? So I traveled all over the United States, 12,000 miles, between September 2020 and September 2021, and I asked hundreds of people that question. And when I asked them that question in September, October, November 2020, their eyes would fly open when I'd say, it's January 1st, 2020. Because it was almost like a visceral, you could almost see them just kind of stiffen. And so, people often talk for 30 to 45 minutes, almost without breathing. I mean, that was the one question I asked. I got lucky, I stumbled on a really great question. And even Jim Perdue, the president of Purdue Farms, Frank Purdue's son, I told him, I said, Jim, there's only one question. This is it. And when he got done, he said, how long did I talk for? And I said, 18 minutes. And he said, that is the longest answer I've given in my life. So, before I get into my story, I would love to hear all of your stories, which obviously we don't have time for. But I'm going to ask you, it's January 2020. Can I have 5 people just put your hand up and just share what you remember from what your life was like in January 2020? And if I can get 3 people, that would be good, but I need a couple of hands. Yes, sir.
My name's Aaron Shaw. My life in 2020, I was working over in the building over 1025 on a Think Place over in Morrisville as an IT support person for UNC Healthcare. My kids were at Fort King Military Academy, so they brought the COVID home. And because of conditions, I said, I'm not gonna last through this because and then I did last. I got the shots, I just kept working out. But then I ended up over at Rex Hospital and supporting, these floors. So I got to see the real face of COVID and what it does to people. I just thought it was the end. There's no way I could, survive this. I just thought it was the end. But that's my story. Thanks.
Thank you, Aaron. Anybody else wanted to just help us all figure out where we were in January 2020? Any other hand go up? All right, Jennifer.
In January of 2020, I remember sitting at a Rotary meeting on a Friday lunch. We were meeting at Extraordinary Ventures back then, and asking for you all to send prayers and thoughts with us, because I was leading a group of 20 volunteers over to Asia to do some mission work with Habitat for Humanity. So the end of January 2020, I actually was on a flight out through Hong Kong to Myanmar, and that's how the pandemic started for me.
Wow. Okay. Yes, sir.
In January, I was supposed to get cataract surgery, and so I got one eye done, and they were saying, we're going to close all the hospitals except for emergencies and all that stuff. I didn't think they would close that. It was just as an outpatient, but I didn't know for sure, so I didn't want to go a long time with just one eye done, but I got that done. And then during the year, we basically stayed home and played. We quit playing pickleball because we thought that might be dangerous. But we were playing wherever you hit the balls with a mallets. We were playing that in the front yard.
Croquet.
But by the end of the year, we moved from the town we were living in to Chapel Hill. And so it turned out good.
There you go. Okay. Thank you guys for sharing. All right, so in January 2020, and I'm going to run through this quickly because I've edited so many times, this is going to be automatic. January 2020, I was returning from the Caribbean, great Christmas vacation, telling everybody how much I love my job, how I was so fortunate, things were so great. And then on January 17th, I got hit with an unknown virus. It hit my 8th cranial nerve, took out my vestibular system so I couldn't walk, and I couldn't hear out of my right ear. I was using a walker for a little bit, and I still can't hear out of my right ear. So that's why I kept leaning over. And then my daughter and I went and got her prom dress for her senior year. And then March 13th, the schools closed, and I got laid off from my nonprofit job because I was doing national PR for a national nonprofit. I had events going at the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House for April that had to be canceled. We were going to go into an event with John Legend, with our founder, and that had to be canceled. So I got laid off. So I was home, just like everybody else was in Chapel Hill, and I really became enchanted with the Facebook group, or the Facebook group of a view from my window. And I don't know if there's so, I see Barb nodding, but people from all over the world were posting on Facebook views from their windows. And I just found that to be enchanting. And it made me start to wonder how everybody else was doing. And then I remember watching the Italians and the Spanish standing on their balconies and singing and playing instruments and playing pots and pans. And it made me think of them a lot, thinking, well, I've got this yard and I can have, I've got all these walking paths, and what must it be like to be stuck in an apartment? Thank goodness they had a balcony. Maybe some people didn't. So I started thinking about others. I think a lot of us did. I'm actually thinking about writing an op-ed entitled, I Like This Better, during the pandemic. I got laid off. I submitted 86 customized cover letters. Nobody wanted me. Nobody. I even offered my services for free as a 57-year-old intern. Zero. Law degree? Nobody cared. So, on July 15th, I sat in a Target parking lot in my car and I said, Michelle, you have to figure out where the movers are going to take your stuff when the lease on the post-divorce house is up on July 31st. It doesn't make any sense to rent a place because I don't know where I'm going to have to go live. Well, I had a motorhome because I homeschooled my family when we lived in Chapel Hill. And I road schooled them once for 10 months in caravan with my parents, who were full-time motorhomers because they got sick of country club life. And they had gone for 7 years all over the country. So we joined them for 10 months in our own motorhome, and then 4 months. And so I was like, okay, I'll just move into the motorhome with my dog Buddy. Yes, and for those of you who know about Steinbeck and Travels with Charlie, I had no clue at that time. I had no idea that somebody had done this before. And so I just, okay, I'm gonna move into the motorhome. And I thought, what am I gonna do? And I thought, well, I could take it to the beach, but you can wake up panicked every day in paradise, right? And I had not had any success, so I thought, okay, continuing to do that is just gonna freak me out. And what I did something that I later found out is very powerful. I spoke to a woman who's an executive director of a nonprofit in Georgia, and she said, oh, Michelle, action is the antidote to fear. Well, that's what I did instinctively. It was like a run, Forrest, run moment where I just got in the motorhome and started driving. I thought, okay, you gotta do something when you're driving. I can't go to national parks and stuff because even if they were open, that's where I was with my kids. I would be sobbing the whole way. So what am I gonna do? And that's when Humans of New York, and you may not be familiar with it, but this guy by the name of Brandon Stanton went around and photographed 10,000 people in New York City. And while he was photographing them, we started to get their stories. So we started to put the photos out on social media, and their little stories. It became a book, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, I'll do Americans of the Pandemic. Now, when I was headed out, so I went 12,000 miles all over the United States on 5 different trips, and I interviewed hundreds of people. So one of my questions for you is, can I see a show of hands of how many of you traveled outside of North Carolina in the fall of 2020? Okay, a few. So I'm naive, incredibly naive. UNC Press required me to write an author's blog, and the first sentence was, I am often very naive. And I think it took a naive person to do what I did, probably. I also wrote, I did not write this book, because I didn't. It's a collection of 100 first-person stories in their own words. There are no photos in here, other than they required me to put a few of me in there. I wish I had taken more opportunities to wear makeup, but I didn't. I had photos taken, so there you go. So there are no photos in here. So it tumbles you through the pandemic, through 100 stories from all over the country, and I was very deliberate. I had a grid. I wanted to make sure I really tried to get a representative sample of the country in terms of jobs, religion, geographic areas, the size of a town. I loved hearing about that little town on the eastern shore. The first person who got up here and spoke. Where? Exactly. Love those little towns. I left my heart in Shamrock, Texas. So very comparable. And so I've lost my way now. Okay. So I didn't include photos because I found out from our peer reviewers, this is published by UNC Press and Duke Center for Documentary Studies, I found out from our peer reviewers that they regarded this as elegiac. I didn't know what elegiac meant. I heard elegy before, but elegiac means poetic. And I thought, well, it wouldn't be elegiac if you had photos, because it would sort of stop you and you would assess maybe how much you really needed to read the story, how much this person's story could relate to you. So there are no photos because I think we can all get something from everybody. And so anyway, so that was the outcome. It certainly wasn't my intention. I was just going to do a project so that I could get a job. I was going to come back here in December of 2020 and say, look what I can do, hire me. And then I was at a Lions Club meeting in October of 2020 in Henrietta, Oklahoma, and a woman said, is this a book? And people started saying, this is a book. And I was like, no, I don't want a book. I don't want to try to sell a book. So I was asked, oh, do you have books to sell? I'm like, no, I really don't. I don't want to do that. So yes, you can get this at McIntyre's bookstore. I'll be there tomorrow at 2 p.m. to do this. And Erin Keck from WCHL and I are going to be at Flyleaf on April 4th, and there'll be signed copies of both. But yeah, I didn't bring books today. I didn't want to do that. So I said, no, this is not a book. But then people were like, oh. And they were just completely confused with me. They're like, this is history you're collecting. This needs to be preserved for future generations. So December 2020, sent an email to UNC Press. Is this a book? Yes, as a matter of fact, it is. And so that's why I'm here. Okay, that's my story. How am I doing on time?
You're great.
Okay, now I'm going to start telling you about some of the people I met. Like I said, I really try to make this incredibly diverse. I even interviewed a Buddhist monk at the temple in San Diego. That was fascinating. And I'm not even going to try to explain that one to you because he said things that represented a perspective that I don't swim in, I guess. And so I would butcher this. You actually have to buy the book to hear this. So I interviewed mayors and leaders. So for example, a new mayor named Cedric Williams in a little town called Forest City, Arkansas. And Cedric he had a little insurance, one-man insurance agency on the main road, and he'd been mayor for 2 years when COVID hit. He said, Michelle, I was just learning how to be mayor when this thing hit. And he said, there was no playbook for us mayors. And so talking to him about that whole, and how to communicate. How do you communicate to people who are off the grid? And he also said there was a lot of confusion. Like he said, I tried to get people, listen to the local advice we're giving you. There's a lot of noise coming out of the national level, just, listen to us. And he would go on the radio every week to try to say, but he goes, what about the people who weren't on the radio? So they use the water bills, which everybody gets. Wasn't that a good idea, right? So they use the water bills to communicate. Jen Michelle Kearney, who was the publisher of the only black newspaper in Cincinnati. She also was a new member of the city council. She's now vice mayor of Cincinnati. And she had a couple of perspectives, because one was when things happen, some communities call their local newspaper to say, should I do this? Should I do that? So she said, yes, we did get calls to say, what portion of bleach do I use? I'm like, no, don't use bleach. And she also became a proponent of the mask mandate as a councilwoman, and then she got COVID. And so ended up being, so hearing her perspective was interesting. I interviewed Valerie Fouché. And Valerie, the first 2 cases of COVID were in her district. And she was down in Charlotte at a meeting when she got a text from North Carolina, was it DHHS or whatever, saying, hello, Valerie, we need to speak with you. And so she talked about that, but she also talked about how many friends she lost. And how when she was at one funeral, she was wondering why somebody was missing, and they didn't tell her for several hours later why that person was missing. So Valerie had a very personal part of her story, as well as being a leader. And she kept saying, people kept asking me, how can I support my family? I don't understand this PPP thing, and the unemployment system is not working as quickly. So it's trying to field so many questions. So what I kept hearing, when you think about what Cedric said, what Jan Michelle said, and what Valerie said, it was all about how do I get information to the people who need it. I think that's what a lot of our leaders were charged with. Okay, then chambers, presidents, and visitor centers presidents. Kevin in Ocala, Florida, when the 28 recession happened, they just got clobbered. And they just were not organized as, I guess, municipality, county, whatever. So they had gotten themselves super organized, and they had also decided to diversify some of how they use their property. And so that if there were another like real estate crisis, that they were a little bit more diversified. And so when things hit, they already had this group of people who remember, okay, these are the levers that we push. And so they were right there to start applying for PPP, and they already had the networks to talk to their people about, this is how you do it. They already had, once again, an information distribution system. So that's Kevin's. Mike, I was not mad at a single person I interviewed over all that time, except for a guy by the name of Mike, who was a chamber president in a small town in Indiana that he was not from. And he was thrilled with all the box stores doing super well, but his downtown was dying. And I said, well, what about your downtown? I went down there to try to support one of your local restaurants. He's like, oh. Because the people who are here, they just keep all they talk downtown, 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 downtown. I'm so sick of it. Look, we got lines coming out the Dairy Queen, we got lines coming out Menards. Like, why do they have to complain about the downtown? That made me angry. That was the only time I was angry the whole time. I didn't say anything, but I was judging because I was like, yeah, you should not be the chamber president. And then there was Rick Roden from Scottsboro, Alabama. And one of the things that made him wonder is, do we close down the right businesses? Do we close down the right amount of time? Was that worth it? And they also had a video campaign that they put out about wearing masks. And they got a lot of the community leaders to be in it. They made it fun. And then Lori Pagliacelli. I interviewed her in August 2020, just as clusters were happening at UNC. Remember the clusters? And Lori said, this whole tension about, do we bring the students back? Do we not bring the students back? How does this work? How does football season work? So Lori talked a little bit about that, and actually that's on my website. So I have some stories that are on my website that are not in the book. Lori's is one of them, and the website's whowearenow.us. very easy to remember. Stores. Jeannie Pedersen, who owns Uniquities up in Hillsborough, North Carolina, she's in the book. And she felt very, very blessed that she's in a house and she has a porch. And so she moved a bunch of her stuff outside of her shop and then let some of her main customers know that she's open for business on this particular day, and everybody did their shopping outside, and that was a pretty neat story. Trey Washington, Birmingham, Alabama, fine men's clothing. I had been really intrigued, what about the higher end, clothing stores? And Trey had just set up in this part of Birmingham that his heart was really in redeveloping, and so it wasn't a great location. It's not where men would usually go for fine men's clothing. So he was already a little bit challenged in his model for his business. And what he ended up doing was he ended up doing custom clothing, going to people. And that became very profitable, and he ended up really doing well. So that was kind of an interesting one. Restaurants. Eric up at Yonder in Hillsborough, they didn't think they were going to survive. They're a bar, and they weren't able to have people in the bar. And they discovered something called buzz balls, which are cute little drinks in a little ball. And they set them up on like this pass-through kind of window they have at the front of the store. And so people were walking around, because a lot of us walked around, wanting to be outside. And so they saw the buzz balls sitting there, and that really helped them. And slushies, alcoholic slushies, and that worked. Actually, slushies also worked over at Dewey Beach, Delaware. The governor was like, yeah, that's fine, let them walk out with alcohol. So orange crushes were going out the door by the hundreds every day, and it kept them afloat. Let's see, Kevin Callahan, Acme Restaurant, Carborough. He had a really interesting take on it. He's like, a lot of people, because remember this was during spring break, a lot of people probably are missing vacations that they had planned. So he has about an email list of several hundred people. So he sent out an email to everybody and said, you know what, we want to make you feel like you didn't miss that vacation. Send us some ideas of some food you would have had on that vacation, and we'll do like Mexican night in Cancun or an Italian whatever. And it was just kind of fun because people felt seen, they felt heard, they started to feel connected. He also, helped organize food for people who couldn't afford it as well over in our community. Maurice in Raton, New Mexico. This one fascinates me. And what I learned about myself is there's this principle of scarcity and abundance. When something is scarce, if you get really quiet and you think about what you have in abundance and you don't edit it, you will find that that abundance will either alleviate or cure your scarcity or put you on a different path. It's how my dad saved the astronauts on Apollo 13. And it's how I saved myself in the summer of 2020, because I didn't have a house, a spouse, a job, or a kid to take care of. But I did have a motorhome and a whole bunch of skills and tons of curiosity and a whole bunch of experience driving all over the United States. Maurice did the same thing. So Maurice had this restaurant and a little motel. You know the kind that you drive up, you see the motel, you see a tiny little restaurant in front of it? Raton, New Mexico, which is actually a fairly well-frequented tourist corridor. And so he thought, okay, what am I gonna do? He didn't have a pass-through, so one of the first things he did was put a hole in the wall to do the pass-through. And he noticed that the food that they were offering in his restaurant was not really hitting. And so he thought, okay, I'm gonna change things up. And he changed the menu so it tasted better as a take-home. That was clever. He then said, okay, wait a minute. The hotels, they're just offering these grab-and-go things. Remember the paper bags was like, here's an apple, like that's breakfast. And he thought, there's some people who still want to have a really good warm He had never served breakfast before. So he came up with a breakfast menu, and then he walked around to all the hotels in the area and said, we're serving hot breakfast. Would you please give these handouts to your guests? He built a roof on top of his restaurant so that people could eat outside. And he had one of those carport kind of things that, if you drove up to the reception, he turned that into sort of movie night and you can eat outside. Very clever. There were some people who couldn't be that clever, like Dominic Cinino. Mama's Restaurant, downtown Manhattan, since 1973. As of January 31st, 2021, he was not allowed to have anybody in his restaurant to eat in. He was getting financially creamed. It's really hard to be creative in that situation. Ann Valero, who had a bar, event space in DC, she ended up becoming the leader of this huge nonprofit that provided food and toilet paper and antiseptic stuff to basically the entire hospitality industry of the Washington, D.C. metro area. Speaking of nonprofits, remember I mentioned Rena told me action is the antidote to fear. She is the executive director of a nonprofit in Georgia, and they were terrified they weren't going to be able to raise money during the pandemic. And they had this big in-person event planned, right? Jennifer's nodding, Habitat. And she's like, we're just going to do something online. And what ended up happening, right? You don't have to pay the money for the event. The same people who are going to give you money. Even more people give you money. And she's like, we are ahead in 2020. And so many of the nonprofits I spoke to were ahead in 2020 on fundraising. And they also didn't have to spend the money on ballrooms. Let's see. Jackie Pope here in town. She's with Salon Lofts. And she had a particular problem when she was reopening. A lot of her customers thought they should be first for haircuts. The ones that already had an appointment that had to be canceled in March, or the ones that have an appointment every month and they were already scheduled. And so she thought, what am I gonna do? And she raffled off tickets. The more tickets you bought, the higher you up you got, so you could choose when you got to come in. She raised $4,500 and gave it to table. There are all sorts of different ways to do this. There's a woman named Anne who was a wedding planner in Los Angeles, and she could not do weddings. But she loved providing food and entertainment and space for people. So she started doing lunches for the unhoused in LA every Monday. And when I talked to her, she's like, I don't know if I'll ever go back to weddings. This is the most important work I've done in my life. Entertainment. There's a woman named, you gotta look her up. I'm gonna spell this. Actually, it's on my website, whowearenow.us. I have some of Christina's story on the website. Christina Wong, Kristina Wong, W-O-N-G. And then you'll, Pulitzer, $550,000 Doris Duke Awards. That's just what happened to her in the past 3 months, okay? So, back up. She was a comedian in LA. She had run for political office in Koreatown, and she was going to do sort of like a national tour about running for office. And she had just launched her national tour when COVID came, boom. So she's at home, and she's a non-essential worker. She differs with that, by the way, in terms of entertainment. And she needed to do something, and so she started making masks on her Hello Kitty sewing machine. And she put it out on Facebook. What ended up happening was she became the organizer of hundreds of people all over the country making face masks for vulnerable communities. They made 350,000 face masks. And she called herself, they called themselves the Aunties because Christina's Asian, and Aunties is sort of like an older woman in your community. So the Auntie Sewing Squad. So when things started to open up again in New York City, and I was there for the opening of Broadway in New York City in September 2021, which was really fun. And Christina had an off-Broadway show based on her experience with this group. And it was, and it won a finalist role. So she's now the owner of, I guess, or earned a Pulitzer Prize final award for drama. And then about a month ago, the Doris Duke Foundation gave her a $550,000 unrestricted cash award for her work. So all sorts of stories, all sorts of stories. So who we are now, that's the name of the book, Who We Are Now. Who are we now? I can tell you, because I did this, I went all over the country, we're not who you see on TV. We're not. I know that, you know, and I'm gonna get emotional, I'm gonna try not to. I know that. I know it's really hard to believe. Probably think I'm a Pollyanna. Probably think that I must have misinterpreted and being naive. It's probably at the heart of it. It's not. When I drove out into the country, I was afraid. I thought that I would find a country that was very different from the one I grew up in. And I didn't. I didn't. And we're still there. After I do the interviews, most people said to me afterwards, they'd lean in and they'd say, so, how's everybody doing out there? Can you tell me, like, a couple stories about some other people? How are they doing? Really, almost every person did that. And then they'd say, some of them would say, how is it out there? Fearful, what I was saying. Man, it's the country, you know, that you've known. And then they would some of them would get angry and they'd say, oh, we should just get rid of social media and, you know, and what are those news, and they would name a few, stations doing to us. Now, I grew up as a political science major at UNC. I always thought the press was the fourth estate. It had a role. And it wasn't until, remember naivete, wasn't until somebody said to me, well, they're just making money off of us, pitting us against each other. And I was like, oh yeah. We're like the Rock'em Sock'em Robots. You guys remember the Rock'em Sock'em Robots? You just, all right, that's who we are and that's how we've been used. So you can disagree with me, that's fine. My particular view is that we are the country we have always been. I even went to Washington, D.C. right after the BLM protests, and I went the night before the election in 2020. My kids were like, oh my God, Mom, get out of there, it's so dangerous. I'm like, no, it's not. I showed them pictures of tourists in a baby carriage right in front of the White House crossing the street. Yes, it was boarded up for like two or three blocks around the White House. The fence around the White House looked a little strange. I mean, I lived in DC for a decade, but I was like, yeah, that makes sense for right now. I didn't find it to be what I thought it was, sitting at home in my house in Chapel Hill. So anyway, for what it's worth, I think we're still, we've always been, we've just been whipped up against each other, and we were a captive audience, and that probably didn't do us any good. So I've already covered now where the book is. So 2 o'clock tomorrow at McIntyre's in Farrington, if y'all are interested, and I'll be signing copies so you can get it there. April 4th, the evening at Flyleaf with Aaron Keck. 65% of books are sold through Amazon, which is apparently killing our independent bookstore. So if you choose to get this book, please do think about getting it at Flyleaf or McIntyre. And then on scarcity abundance, I'm going to start speaking about that, and I already used it with my own company yesterday with our vice president. I'm like, you know, we have some issues. Can we just like spend a half an hour doing the scarcity abundance thing? And we're like, oh my God, this thing is powerful. So I'm going to start trying to work on that locally with different groups. If you guys are interested, we could just try it for 30 minutes and see. But the key, you don't really even need me, but the key is name what is scarce. Then get really quiet and put the scarcity over here so it's in the back of your brain. Then get out a big whiteboard or a piece of paper. And don't edit, and just throw up there whatever is abundant for yourself or your company or the context in which you or your community or your faith lives, and things will start to pop out, and it's incredibly powerful. So that's one of the things I learned. And the last thing I'll say is, when I went out there, I thought I was going to find people who are despondent and that there was a lot of despair and division. And what I found instead was pluck. And it's a word that we hardly ever use anymore. It means spirited and determined courage. And that is what I saw with people who lost loved ones, including people who lost children, people who infected others and caused their deaths, people whose businesses were in peril or had been lost. Pluck, spirited and determined courage. And I think that's a survival trait that we probably don't talk about very much, but I think it's gotten us through probably tens of thousands of years. And it is amazing because I saw it everywhere. And that's it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have you seen, and I don't know if your motorhome has Netflix or not. Have you seen 100 Days with Tata?
Okay, my motorhome does not have a TV
Okay.
because I homeschooled my kids, so yeah, like that way that would have been. But and I've not seen or heard of 100 Days with
Tata.
Tata.
It's an Italian musician who goes to take care of his grandmother's aunt, and it's during the pandemic in Italy. So I think you might.
Okay, I will.
You might enjoy that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Pat.
So you're driving around and you hop out of your motorhome, and how reticent are people to talk to a stranger? So how many people do you have to approach to get one person to talk to you?
Did I mention I was naive? So I leave here and I go to this campground in Whiteville. I think I pronounced it right. Is it Whiteville? Thank you. I pronounced it wrong again. I went to Whiteville, Virginia. Started talking to people at the campground. And like, well, I don't know about that lady. It's like, no. So I thought, okay, this is not going to work. And most towns I went into, I couldn't find anybody. Idea. And so I started emailing museums. Anybody remember Neil Offen from the Chapel Hill Herald? Remember when Neil was the editor? So Neil knew everything about the town. So I thought, Neil, okay. So I started emailing like newspapers and radio stations and museums and to find out, would you talk to me? So I slowly started to get people to interview me. I knew I was going to a town and I would prearrange the interviews. But I was still not doing well. And I knew I wanted it to be this mosaic. And so when I got out to Cheyenne, Wyoming, this is October, right? Nobody in Cheyenne was responding to my emails. That's a big place. They're like, who's this lady? And so I thought, what's a small town? Small towns, right? They'll welcome you, right? What's a small town right near Cheyenne? Pine Bluffs, Wyoming, population 900, a little bit bigger than your town. And I thought, okay. And then I remembered, I went to this conference called Radically Rural. I'm not pronouncing that word, but Radically Rural. And I was on the journalism track, and they said Facebook for small towns is the new town square. Anything going on in a community, you will find on Facebook. So I thought, okay, I'll go to Facebook. So I went to Facebook for Pine Bluffs, Wyoming, and they had a kite festival in September. And I thought, wow, people on the East Coast would love a kite festival. They can't have a kite festival. So the woman's like, yeah, I'll talk to you, the director of Parks and Rec. And I'm there just like, why do you care about a kite festival? And what she didn't tell me is they also had a rodeo in July. And the food trucks ran out of food because there were so many people there. But anyway, but she was a connector, and she started connecting me with everybody in the community, and that was the flywheel. Was Facebook, and then connectors. Good question. Did you have a question?
Who made you cry? We talked about who made you mad, but who made you cry? And then what small town, if we were going to one place that you went, which small town should it be?
Oh my gosh, you're gonna make me choose among small towns? Shamrock, Texas. On Route 66. Patsy and Olita were the two ladies who will greet you as community ambassadors in the town visitor center. And the town visitor center is what used to be a diner and a hotel. And Alita remembers dancing to the jukebox to Elvis Presley when she was a teenager in there. And Patsy was, no, I got the, okay, that's Patsy. And then Alita was a waitress there when she was in high school, and her mom was also working there. And Shamrock was really lovely place. Yeah.
Did you stop in a town called Ketchum, Idaho, by chance?
I did not stop in Ketchum, Idaho, but let's see. I don't think I made it out to Idaho this time. I didn't make it out to Idaho, but I did go to a Halloween outside haunt in what's the name of the town? But it's someplace in Iowa. Got the I. And then it wasn't there. And then who made me cry? I didn't cry during any of the interviews. I did cry when I did a book event last night with Malaprops. I did cry the night before when I did a book event in Vail Ridge. I cried, I almost cried here too, because I really love this country, and I just know in my heart that if everybody could get out and do what I did, they would know what I know in my DNA. But, so that's what makes me sad. Anything, yeah.
Is that your number one lesson learned? That
I didn't realize how different I was than everybody else until the other day, Vail Ridge Books. Because a woman did what a lot of people do after interviewing them, and she's like, is it really that bad out there? No, it's really not. Like, I don't think, and I know that this is not gonna make any sense to you because I'm beginning to feel like an alien. Like because I experienced it so differently than everybody else. I think of the pandemic like kind of as a soft, fuzzy ball, like something that's soft. And I know a lot of people would probably be like, why? Like, isn't it hard and plastic with pointy things? And not for me. Not for me. And a review on the book that just came out that said something like, gone is the shouting and the anger and the finger pointing. Michelle Fishburne shows you a different version of the pandemic. And she said something like, it's something like swanning through a new normal social gathering and getting vignettes as you walk by, people's experiences in the pandemic, and it just reframes it for you. And so, I don't know. I feel like I'm almost like an alien reporting in on something that it's hard to describe. And maybe I'll get better at this. Yeah.
Have you approached public television at all?
I have pitched. Good question. So I do PR. And I've gotten other people to the White House and TEDx talks and on national news. And I was on national news when I did this, but nobody's interested in this book. Nobody's interested in this book, and I've pitched it, and UNC Press has pitched it, and nobody is really interested. So to your point, though, I think the timing's wrong. I think it might be just too soon. I think in 7 years, when we do the 10-year anniversary, I'll probably be very busy. Yes.
So this is obviously a once-in-a-lifetime experience. We hope the pandemic, but it obviously opened your eyes to lots of different things. What is your next project? Where are you going to go?
That's been changing. I think doing this is a very sort of personal thing. Somebody said you have to be able to enjoy it. And I was going to do something fun, but I don't think I'm going to do something fun. I think I'm going to go out again. And my questions, I wrote them up last night, are, but I can't just do this. I'm going to go out with several sets of questions because I'm not going to be able to say, this is a real reason I'm out here. But the first question will be, tell me about what a summer day was like for you during your childhood. So sort of ease into it like that. And I think I'm going to get lots of good, really good, interesting answers on that all over the country, all different ages, right? And then the next question I think is going to be, are you worried about where this country is heading and why? And then the last question will be 3 parts. Do you have a label? Do you think that there's a label that people who don't know you or people who think about people like you, is there a label you think people would put you, a category would put you in? And then the next question would be, how does that label make you feel? And then the last question would be, what do you want people to know about you? So it's that last part that I'm really interested in, but if I went around and said, I want to talk to you about labels, can I interview with you about it? Like, that's not gonna work. So I'm gonna start with the kid thing and then move into the others. And who knows, maybe the next Who We Are Now will be, Who We Are Now childhood. And it'll be people of all different ages with all different experiences, or we'll just see how it plays out. But I think that's what I'm gonna do, and I also hope to speak to different organizations about the scarcity and abundance. After this, if anybody's interested in hearing the Apollo 13 story, I will quickly tell you how my dad used that to save the astronauts.
Where do you want to live?
Where do I want to live?
Do you still want to live in Chapel Hill? Or
it's between Chapel Hill and Washington, D.C., or neither of the above, because what's that? Is that no, I don't think Shamrock, because I need water. Every time I think about living in a brick and mortar, I get hives. So I don't know. I guess it means I'm not ready yet to do that. I'm sure it'll happen one of these days, but not right now. Yes.
What city's on the cover and why was it?
Oh, so UNC Press picked this photo. It's a photo of the freeway going into Los Angeles during the early part of the pandemic when it was shut down, because there is not a car on the freeway. That's something.
Michelle, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey y'all, thank you for coming today. I hope you have a great weekend. Go Heels.
Good.
Oh, yes, thank you. I believe there's no meeting next week. Let's let the current president confirm that, but I'm pretty sure there's no meeting next week. Have a good weekend.
Oh, thank you.
So you're in Turkey. I have good friends in Turkey, and I know it's a small world, right? We know everything. So it's Suzanne, they live in that country called Truckee. They used to live in, and I can't even remember. It was a junkyard.
Well, let's do it over here. There's a couple more.
But there's like a golf course, the Hunter. But I know that we do have I can't remember if we had dinner there, but I didn't know there was.
Nice talking to you.
There's a bar. So which part of Truckee do you live in? Well, I live right below where it started. It's called the Market Valley. It's beautiful, really. But they couldn't believe how much. I mean, are they there now? Yeah, they stayed the whole winter. It's not their vacation. Oh, because they're retired. They make out okay. Yes, they had. He said we've spent a fortune. Yes, exactly. They're not retired. But I didn't say. And lower elevations.
No, I'm not going.
Much higher elevation. We're all getting together. I'm a realtor, so I know her. Oh, okay. You know the neighborhood. Yes. I'll give you my card. Okay. Tell them if they're interested in sell their house or buy a different house. Well, or they just want to say hello. We know you. So what brought you here? Well, I went to Duke and graduated in '83, so I forgive you.
And then Mary, so
and last weekend I got tickets to Spring Street. Oh, good. So I decided to just stay for 3 weeks.
yeah, so Mary.
Good. I have a bunch of friends who still live here from school. Oh, yeah. Eventually I will. Really? You don't want to stay on there? Not in the winter. But I will always keep my place there. So it is beautiful. So nice. Glad you came to our club. Thank you.
I'm ready for them to get the computer.
Oh, really?
So you just check with them and see, and then tomorrow's not a good day because it's supposed to be rainy, stormy, and 40 to 50 mile an hour winds, but I could do it in.
No, it doesn't, it can be even, well, so we're in the middle of Ramadan, right? So they have very strange sleep patterns. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I just got back late last night.
But anyway.
But let me,
You can just let me know.
So you decided to go ahead and give it.
Yeah, and I've got it already. All the stuff's off of it.
Oh, your daughter helped you.
And then I've got a keyboard. I've got a mouse. I probably want to get a mouse that doesn't have a cord. They can get a new mouse.
Yeah, they could get a remote mouse.
I got it ready. I had it set up, but I didn't put it in the box. I've got the instructions with it.
I want you to meet them too. So let me see what they're, because I've been gone for 2 weeks. So let me find out what they're.
It's all good.
Good, thank you. That's wonderful. But it would be nice if we could do it during this next week, because the kids are off school.
I'm not going anywhere.